Hello, BookTube. As you know by now, there is a BookTube event that I am embracing wholeheartedly. It is People April, created by Roz at Scallydandling About the Books and Elizabeth at Bookends and Books. And it is all about life writing. Memoirs, biographies, that sort of thing. I love biographies, my favorite kind of reading to do. So I'm falling upon people with great enthusiasm. I love it. Just love it. I've been adding biographies to my reading list at night, and it's been wonderful. And I've been trying to let those additions take whatever form they will, rather than pursue some sort of agenda. I'm trying not to pursue some sort of agenda. But yesterday, via email, I may or may not have entered into a provisional devil's bargain for NaNoWriMo proper. For NaNoWriMo in November, not Camp NaNoWriMo. If it turns out to happen, it will certainly be the most enjoyable and also the strangest NaNoWriMo that I ever do. But whether or not that devil's bargain turns out to be true, it's the thing that nudged me towards last night's biography, which was, I thought, a reread. But now I'm wondering if maybe it isn't. It doesn't ring a bell to me. It didn't ring a bell to me at all while I was reading it. I reread this, Elizabeth's Rival, by Nichola Tallis. And Nichola Tallis' name has come up recently on this channel because she just wrote a book about the young Queen Elizabeth that I thought was very good, very solid, in a way that I did not think about her book on Lady Jane Grey. I think the book was called Innocent Blood or something like that. I wrote a long, detailed review of that book. If I remember, I will leave a link to it on this video. But ultimately, my verdict on it was that it was breathless and credulous, which is not a good combination for a biography. and I didn't find much of that in the book called Young Elizabeth. But when I returned to this book, or read it for the first time, there is a lot of breathless and credulous stuff in here in this book. The subject virtually guarantees it. Because the subject here is a young woman at Elizabeth's court called Lettice Knowles, who was the granddaughter of the sister of Anne Boleyn, which gives her a tangential connection. She's a cousin to the woman who became Queen Elizabeth I. That's a tangible connection. And those of you who have read copious amounts of Tudor fiction that have been written in the last 25, 30 years, well, you would be right to wonder if maybe she isn't also the granddaughter of Henry VIII. Can we be 100% sure that she is the granddaughter of the man on whom Mary Boleyn was fobbed off when Henry was done with her? Or is it possible that she was Henry's issue? I myself think that the dates line up pretty neatly in that she was not Henry's granddaughter, but the question is there. There's certainly enough of an open ground for you to wonder. It led her to having a bit of a privileged upbringing, even though that upbringing was made dangerous and dodgy by the same person who made everybody's upbringing dangerous and dodgy, which was Queen Mary. But this is that story. It's the story of Lettice Knowles, but it mainly, as you can tell from the title, it mainly wants to deal with one particular story. Elizabeth had a favorite, Robert Dudley, and she, by all accounts, as much as she could, as much as any Tudor ever could, she loved him and could not favor him, could not raise him to be her lord and master, to make him king, and strung him along, basically, would be the modern idiom. And this made him unhappy, and into that unhappiness and his bed jumped Lettice Knowles to the unending ire of the Queen. She couldn't do without Dudley. She couldn't, practically speaking, she couldn't do without him. He was useful. But she could very much do without Lettice Knowles, and that marriage it created a rift between them that was never actually healed. Although it didn't cause her to die, as it certainly would have in the reign of Henry VIII. And the equivalent would have killed her. Instead, Elizabeth was more just than her father, more just than her half-sister, more just, I have to say, well, certainly more just than her mother, but also more just than most of the people in this line, in this storyline. So she was angry, but not bloody-minded. And Lettice Knowles outlived her. So there's a long story to be told there. There's an interesting story to be told there. There are documents that are never consulted when it comes to Lettice Knowles biographies, just never, because they aren't interesting. Whereas a love triangle is interesting. And that's mainly what, when I was reading this book, I was remembering the Jane Grey book, which doesn't have a love triangle, but does have a lot of the same kind of, I want this story to be true because it's so good. It's such a good, juicy story. As opposed to, do you know that it's true? Can you establish its truth? No matter what anybody tries to do, no matter what, whether it's biography or, as we'll see, fiction, there's nothing you can do to make Lettice Knowles come across as a favorable character, even through the gauze work and the Chinese whispers and all the inaccurate and garbled transmissions of primary sources to our present ears. Even with all of that into account, there's no way you can make her into a sympathetic figure. A brainless, opportunity-chasing, brassy little creature, not a shred of personality or interest, although probably very pretty. I came out of this book, I read this book last night in a gulp. Nichola Tallis writes a very smooth prose style. You will, if you think, oh my God, I would need a year to get into shape to read Elizabethan or Tudor history, you're wrong. When it comes to her, you're wrong. You can absolutely notice this copy has a blurb by Tracy Borman, who also writes the same way. You can't go wrong with these authors. You have to hold them a little bit at arm's length in terms of maybe not buying everything hook, line, and sinker that they're trying to sell you, but you would have to do that with a biographer anyway. And they make it easy. They are good, readable prose stylists. So I didn't have a problem with that, but if you're coming to a biography of Lettice Knowles not wanting the soap opera, then you're coming to the wrong book here. There is one book that was done by, I think, an academic press a year ago that didn't read like that, but it was also boring. And it wasn't boring because it skipped the love triangle. It was boring because, as we've mentioned, when it comes to biographies, the biographer didn't think they needed to be interesting. I'm doing all that I need to do. What do you mean? What do you want me to do? Dance for you? If the biographer thinks that, it doesn't matter how many sources they consult. It's still going to... Anyway, I read this book last night. It was good. It was good. It wasn't anything more than good. It was good, and it made me distrustful. It made me deeply distrust whether or not this was just being shaded for romance. And it also put me in the mood for something. By the time I was 2/3 of the way through this book, I was in the mood for a chaser that I had not read in years. And I believe it's the genesis of Nichola Tallis' book on Lettice Knowles, and also the genesis of every other popular biography of this woman that's ever been written in the last 50 years. And that's this, My Enemy the Queen by Victoria Holt. Victoria Holt, an unbelievably fascinating figure, someone who really deserves a 900-page biography that becomes a huge bestseller. She would have liked that, and there's a symmetry in that that she would have approved of. As far as I know, it has never happened. I don't know why. Victoria Holt, this is an author who wrote under many, many pseudonyms. There were many, many points in 20th century reading history when the stereotypical story, I totally believe that it actually happened, but the stereotypical story that crops up in literary memoirs of the time is so-and-so's maiden aunt who goes to the library all the time because she's a huge fan of Victoria Holt, although when she wants to feel a little bit, read something a little bit more racy, or maybe something a little bit more substantial, she'll read Jean Plaidy. And then there's this male author that she really likes who writes quite different things. And, I like to keep my reading nice and diverse, and of course the literary memoirist is writing that story, laughing behind his hand because the maiden aunt doesn't know that all of those authors are the same person. Victoria Holt wrote endlessly, just endlessly. 5, 6, 7 hours a day, every day, all the time, until she physically couldn't do it anymore. And this is her big sudsy novel about Lettice Knowles. It's as well researched as Nichola Tallis. Nichola Tallis doesn't, as far as I can tell, doesn't spend much time in any of the rarefied archives that Victoria Holt would not have used. She seems mostly to be content with resting most of her research on secondary sources, on other historians. That's all that Victoria Holt did. And at least this, has the virtue of knowing that it is sudsy fiction. So when you're reading it, you don't have that tiny little bit of nagging impatience. You can say, all right, I want you to do this job, and you're doing it. So I called up this and read this when I was done with this. They made a good pair, and they have begun the grounding process for me in what will be perhaps a devil's bargain for NaNoWriMo 2024. We'll see if it happens. The closer I get to it, the more I know that it's going to happen, the more I will endlessly talk about it. But in the meantime, it was fun to revisit this. The one particular item of interest, the one particular person of interest that I wanted in both these stories is quickly shuffled off stage left. So I'm going to have to go elsewhere for that. But the story of Lettice Knowles itself, it has a kind of lurid interest no matter what you're doing. I mean, she knew that this was dangerous. She knew that it was. She knew that the Queen had the closest that she could come to as affection for Robert Dudley. She knew that. She knew that when the Queen found out that they had married without her consent, without her knowledge, that she would be in a towering rage. Now, Elizabeth was a little bit more predictable in a towering rage than Henry was, but not much. This was a dangerous thing to do. Not least of which because it's a dodgy thing and a very long, tenuous stretch. But Lettice Knowles, she was close enough connected to royalty, intertwined distantly with royalty, to make this almost a matter of state. Elizabeth had to deal with that a number of times in her reign, with people just willy-nilly making marriage alliances that should have been her call. I don't know that really applies with this one. Dudley was a nobody, and Lettice Knowles is as close as you get to a nobody, but still. Nichola Tallis goes at this story with a will, and I appreciate that. I definitely do. It's like an old friend of mine said, these kinds of books serve their purpose. They open the door. They lay out a welcome mat for a lot of people who might not otherwise even attempt Tudor fiction or Elizabethan fiction or Elizabethan biography. They might not even attempt it. This opens the door for them, and I agree with that. They do, but I don't think I'm the audience. So that was my People in April adventure for last night. Wasn't much to write home about. I think the Young Elizabeth book that I read by Nichola Tallis is my favorite thing by her. I think hands down it is. I think I've read 4 books by her, and it was the only one that didn't seem just choked with breathless gossip. That just didn't seem like it was made for one of those hammy history podcast videos where the person, the biographer, is purposely stalking around the ruins of some castle or something or other, or talking in front of a seascape or an old cannon, making it seem very dramatic, them lit in very dramatic ways. It seemed more like the script for something, the treatment for something like that, than it did a serious work of biography. And serious works of biography can be done about this figure, so I won't go looking for them. I don't really like Lettice Knowles. I don't believe that anybody actually did. Even the people who had sex with her, I don't think they actually liked her. I could be wrong about that. Some of you romantics will probably contradict me. But that's my adventure for today. We will see. I am going to spin the wheel at random for a biographical excursion tonight. So I will report back next time. Thank you, BookTube.